All right, everybody, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Kerri Lemoie. I'm here to talk to you about open badges and verifiable credentials. Yeah. Okay, this is me. I'm Kerri. I have been working in open badges since the very, very beginning, since version 0.5, before there was even something called a backpack. So I spent a lot of time thinking about all the things that you're also thinking about. Thank you. I'm a web technologist. I started out coding in my 20s. I actually didn't even get a degree until I was about 40. I have a PhD now, but along the way I've learned all the things that got me here, which I think is also what a lot of you are thinking about. But in 2016, actually right after I came to this conference in Bologna, we had the 2016 election. And I felt like the web was no longer trustworthy. And maybe it wasn't before, but that was my impression then. So I went to get my PhD to learn about trusting the web, and I learned about the verifiable credential standard. So I did my research on that. And then that somehow brought me right back to education and open badges and open recognition. And now I'm director of the Digital Credential Consortium at MIT. The Digital Credential Consortium is, I'll face this way, Mike, 13 universities in Europe and North America. We were founded actually by Philip Schmidt, who wrote the first Open Badges white paper. So we have that kind of a history, even though we are academic institutions. We also founded the VC-Edu Task Force, which is the W3C, where we work with education data standards to align that work with the verifiable credential standard. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the DCC later. But just to tell you a little bit about the kind of things that we do, what our members do. We do things like Canvas integration with LTI. We work with software like OpenEdX to do MicroMasters. That's what they're doing right now as verifiable credentials. They're also issuing professional certifications and also micro-credentials. One of those is at Harvard, where they're doing a very popular CS50 course that is free for anybody to take. You can also get a certificate that will be a verifiable credential. And lastly, we also work on degrees. Like, we believe that we can issue degrees as verifiable credentials very soon, and that this will be some kind of signal to the market, and also develop the software that would make it possible for everything else to be issued as verifiable credentials. So this is what I'd like to do today. First, I'd just like to tell you a little bit more about what verifiable credentials are, because some of you may not understand what that means. I also just want to point out some of the characteristics and the opportunities with verifiable credentials, including Open Badges 3.0, tell you a little bit of guidance about how to implement them. And then if we have time, I only have 30 minutes, but we have some questions, and hopefully I'll leave you with some ideas. I'll be here till Friday, so we can always talk after this too. All right, so what is or are verifiable credentials? It is a web standard. It's a W3C web standard. W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium. And they do the standards like HTML and CSS. So now that there is a standard called verifiable credentials, this means that across the web, this is how claims will be verified. It's a standardized way of doing digital signatures, which I think most people are familiar with because of COVID. Right? We were all signing things digitally, but they didn't really mean anything like as a standard. They weren't interoperable. But what this means is that verifiable credentials can be standardized across the web. So any claims, so this can be open badges, open recognition, degrees, certifications, but also government documents, right? Citizenship documents, verification of degrees by governments, and also user accounts online, right? All sorts of things can be used as verifiable credentials. But we also talk about them as objects. Like, we all have verifiable credentials, or we all will have verifiable credentials. So when you hear about them, you'll hear about them both ways. It's really hot up here, you know. All right, so There's two sort of columns for verifiable credentials. There's a digital signature standardization, which we just talked about. And there's also proof. And proof is the part of the standard, part of the metadata inside of the verifiable credential that tells verifiers how this was signed, so that they could replicate that and make sure that the signature the issuer has been signed properly, but also that the data hasn't been tampered with since it's been signed. It's worth noting that also Open Badge's previous versions could do this too, but once again, they weren't standardized. So now the standardization part is that verifiers can know to look for that proof and understand how to do it. Doesn't mean they all use the same cryptographic methods. It just means that you understand how to do it. Additionally, you can do issuer identity verification. This is a valid check. It's not part of the standard, but some may choose to do it. In Europe, we have the ePIC blockchain for issuers. In the US, we have some other registries where you can look up the issuers. You can also check the expiration date, whether or not it's been revoked, and also whether the data is applicable to where it's being used, right? That's also considered the validation part. Some of the benefits for the issuer. The issuer can be anybody, right? We talk about issuers as institutions or governments. They could be any of us, right? It could be ourselves, being our own issuers of self-attestations. We determine what data goes in the credential. We authenticate the subject. If it's, say, a university, somebody would log in, and they would determine that it is their identity. And the issuer also signs as a digital signature. And then the subject. So the credential subject, or the earner or the learner, has persistent access to their claims. This is very different than Open Badges 2.0, where credentials are hosted on a website, and they have to be there for you to access them for however long that web server is alive. But with verifiable credentials, they're in a wallet. They're signed, and once they're signed, that's what they are. Subjects also have access to, control, privacy control, so who can see their data? We talked about this a little bit earlier about how important that is, right? So somebody can decide who has access to their data, when they can have access to their data, and it doesn't have to be hosted in a public site. And also, they're data rich, right? All Open Badges since version 1.5 and now, and verifiable credentials, can be filled with metadata. We often talk about the name, the description, the criteria, but there can be a lot of other rich metadata that can be included in these credentials. And then lastly, the verifier. So the verifier can check that it's cryptographically secure, that it has actually been issued to the subject, because the subject, when they're presenting it to them, it'll be digitally signed by them. And then also, once again, a rich data set for the verifier to consume and use as part of their application. I think that in Open Badges, we do a lot of sharing of web pages with our badges on them. But we don't really talk enough about the consumption of the data and what that means. And I think that's a pretty critical aspect of this. It's also worth noting that in Open Badges, we mostly talk about something called the badge class, right? Where it's a URL that hosts the data for the badge class. Everybody who gets that badge, uses that data. With Open Badges 3.0 and verifiable credentials, the achievements can be unique per individual. And that means when the verifier is looking at this data, they're not looking at a hosted set of badge classes. They're looking at the data that's actually signed in the credential. That's a huge difference. Yeah, here, okay. I just also wanted to mention the flexible data model. Like I said before, they're all using linked data. And in these linked data, this linked data means that there's vocabularies. The vocabularies are referenced inside of the credential. These models here, the European Learning Model, which Franz and Ronald are going to talk a little bit more about, CTDL, which is the Credential Transparency Description Language, the CLR, which is being talked about a lot in the States, and of course, Open Badge. So what happens is if all of these are aligned as verifiable credentials, and you have versions of these in your credential app, in your digital wallet, They will all be able to be understood by applications because there are vocabularies that are being referenced inside of these credentials. So, Open Badges 3.0, what does that mean with what we're doing now? Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. Fictional story, by the way. I'm making this up. But this is Robin. And Robin's completed their MicroMasters in Project Management at OpenEdX. OpenEdX is offering an open badge that represents the MicroMasters, which is true. I don't actually know if they have a project management one, but they have MicroMasters. And how this works is Robin would log into her profile at OpenEdX. She'd click on her profile page. There'd be a QR code that says, this is your credential for your MicroMasters. She would download a wallet application. She would use her QR code to open up the credential in the wallet, and it would actually ask her if she wanted to accept it or not, and she would. Sounds pretty simple, right? But let me tell you a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes. So what actually happens is when you say create an application, like we have the learner credential wallet for the DCC. When you create the wallet, you can create a profile. It has a decentralized identifier built into it. So when she's logged into OpenEdX, OpenEdX has already authenticated her. And then when she goes to click on this link, it's a unique link for her credential. And then OpenEdX says, hey, why don't you send me the decentralized identifier? The wallet sends the DID. OpenEdX adds that DID to her credential data, digitally signs it, sends it right back to the wallet, then she has it in her wallet. Pretty simple transaction, and all of that is open source, available for anybody to use. All this software, so it's great. It's a pretty seamless experience for everybody. The advantages of Open Badges 3.0. It's actually a deeper list than what I've put here, so bear with me. So, lifelong learning and longevity. I've built Open Badges platforms, a whole lot of them. Most of them don't exist anymore. All of those badges are gone. And that broke my heart so many times. And so many times I tried to package them up and send them to people. And it really made me think about the implications of that. Because we like to talk about lifelong learning as part of this community. And what happens 20 years from now when I really want those credentials? And you might think, oh, 20 years from now, who cares? But I had 52 jobs before I started coding, right? And a lot of those skills apply to what I do now. So you know that's the truth for you now, right? So the thing about verifiable credentials is even if the issuer goes away, even if the website goes away, you can still prove that this data was signed, right? You can prove the authenticity, thank you, of the data. And you can also prove that it hasn't been tampered with. So that's something, right? That is something to have. Next, privacy. We already talked about privacy. You have more control over Open Badges 3.0 privacy than you do previous versions. That's because in order for an Open Badge 2.0 data to be verified, it has to be public somewhere. It has to be on a public web server for someone to be able to access it. Most of the badging platforms don't let you control whether or not that data is public. Autonomous digital identity. One of the most terrible things about open badges, and I say this from experience because we've been arguing about it since version 0.5, is that they're issued email addresses. Because email addresses go away. People lose control over them. Schools take them away. Employers take them away. People delete them. Like, I have old email addresses that I'm like, never going to look at that inbox again. It's so polluted, right? So with Open Badges 3.0, you don't have to use email. You can use decentralized identifiers. You can also put names in them. You can put other things in them that can be protected because you control the privacy. Then we can put our names in these credentials, which we also haven't been able to do with Open Badges previously. Badge image being optional. So that's crazy to think about, right? Because we've always talked about baking stuff into badge images. That's been a requirement of Open Badges for many years. But with Badges 3.0, we don't need images. They can just be data sets. And that's a very different thought, because how many of you gone to like create your badges and thought about what is this thing gonna look like, right? It's often the first thing that many of the badges platforms provide. And lastly, achievement types. In Open Badges 3.0, you can specifically state what the achievement is. So you can say, this is a micro-credential, or this is a degree, or this is a certification, and you can specifically state what that is. You could always issue anything as open badges. That's always been the case. They're open badges, they're open, right? But being able to say what they are is actually a wonderful feature, because people will know what they're looking for inside of the data. Okay. I'm really speeding through this, so we should have plenty of time for questions. So how can the DCC help? So we have a small team. We're housed at MIT. We're only really housed at MIT because the chair of our leadership council is a professor at MIT. So right now, this is where we're located. But what we do is we work with our members and the open community on implementing verifiable credentials. We're taking the stand on verifiable credentials because we believe in the interoperability of it. So that is where we are focused. How can we issue credentials as verifiable credentials? We help institutions figure out security considerations. For instance, if institutions are going to be digitally signing degrees, then those keys need to be kept very secure, right? You want to make sure that they aren't stolen, that anybody isn't going to reuse them. So there's a lot to think about there. Some of the institutions are even purchasing hardware or using systems to really like harden where they're going to store those keys. So we help them think about that. The metadata and models. So we spend also a lot of time helping institutions figure out what is the data model of their credentials. I wouldn't say that we are spending a lot of time on competencies and skills. Like, that's not really our expertise. There's like the envelope of the verifiable credential, and then there's like the letter. You'll hear that quite a bit. We're not focusing so much on the letter. We are focusing more on the envelope and the delivery and the security. But we are working with the standards bodies to help make sure that there are properties available to like populate the letter, right? Like, we know that that has to happen. Display of credentials. We're doing some pretty great stuff right now with this. As part of the verifiable credentials spec, they're introducing something called a render method, where the issuer can suggest, hey, this is how we would like it to display. So we've been working on a PDF export as part of our wallet. So the issuer, for instance, Tech de Monterey is one of our schools, and they're going to be issuing their degrees soon as this. And they have a PDF that they want the degree to look like. So what they've given us is an SVG template that actually gets signed with the rest of the data. And then if the wallet notices that and it can access it, then it will provide a way for the student to export their PDF right on their phones. It sounds crazy to talk about PDFs and paper and all of those things. Turns out people really want that, right? So we can, at some point, maybe even digitally sign those. We can add verifiable links to those. But our first phase is really making it so that you can do that. And then lastly, what we really do is vendor support. We would love to work with anybody here who's a vendor, the LMSs, the SISs, right? Anybody to help understand how to issue verifiable credentials. Because we just want to make this easy. We want to increase adoption. And we're in a place where we're able to do that. So we're going to provide that support to as many vendors and implementers as we can. And here's how. I put some QR codes in here to help with this. We have a set of microservices that are in Docker hubs. And all you have to do is move these onto a web server and use the endpoints to issue these credentials. So you can plug into these microservices from any platform that you have now. There's standardized endpoints that are follow a protocol called VC API, and It's pretty easy. So it just calls like an issuer coordinator. You send the data to the issuer coordinator, and you can decide if it should check whether or not it's been issued before, whether or not it's been revoked, and if it's not, it signs it, and it sends it back to the wallet. We also have an admin dashboard that plugs into the microservices. We just started working on this with Learning Economy Foundation. We actually did this because block certs, how many people are familiar with block certs? Oh, quite a few. So part of how block certs is done is you upload a CSV file with all the information, and then it issues it as a batch. We wanted to follow that same administration process for the people who do that work. So the admin dashboard is a CSV upload, and it sends the email to the earners or the learners, and then they go download the wallet, and they can get the credential following all of that using their microservices. Excuse me. Within the admin dashboard, you can create a credential template, you can create a credential email or email template, and all of that gets populated by the CSV file. And it's actually agnostic as to what data standard it is. I mean, it is base verifiable credentials, but it doesn't have to be open badges. But most people are using that for now. Our learner credential wallet right now is focused on open badges, primarily because that's the simplest standard right now in this space. This is how you can download the wallet if you'd like to try that. And then we've also built something called the Verifier Plus. This is software that you can make a link from the wallet that actually creates a URL in the Verifier Plus that can be shared. From the wallet, you can decide if that link exists or you can delete it, which is how you control the privacy. We have been telling folks, build off of this. So all of this is open source. It's MIT licensed. Take it, use it, take the wallet, and then build your apps on that. It's ready for you to do that. You can take the Verifier Plus and put that somewhere. And all of it works really well together. And it's getting better every time we use it and every time somebody else uses it. Oh, sorry, everybody. Wow, now I'm much louder. I'm just going to do that. There we go. Okay, community. Like I mentioned before, the DCC founded the VC Education Task Force. Simone is here. He is one of the co-chairs of the task force. I was also a co-chair until recently. They host calls on Mondays to introduce people to the work in the world, talk about use cases, talk about implementations. We are very active at the CCG, which is the community credential group that the VCG is a part of. We contribute to the Open Badges CLR spec pretty regularly. We are on the CTDL advisory group, and we also host our calls. So in addition to doing software and trying to help people implement things, we are really active in the community. And then lastly, I like to think about it as an applied research lab. Where we build out things, we put them out in the world, we see how it works, we make it better, and then we do it again. Ideally, in the future, we will write more papers, publish more things, so that everybody can learn more from us. I don't think we've done that well enough in the past, but we plan to in the future. Last year, I think, we released a research paper called Credentials to Employment, the Last Mile. That was research with employers, talking about what would be needed for them to really accept verifiable credentials. And then also recently, we worked with a bunch of organizations, including T3, Jason's over there, on the ecosystem map. Okay, and what that does is it shows who the stakeholders are in our ecosystem, what they need, and what they're doing. So please check those things out. I'm not gonna have a lot of time for the next section here. So things I'll just sort of point out. You don't need blockchain. You could use it for identity, but you don't need it. I'm really going to go through these fast. Can 2.0 and 3.0 coexist? Absolutely. When Nate and Serge presented, they talked about how that could happen. In your 2.0 platforms, you could just export as a 3.0 to the wallet. That's a perfectly fine way to start doing this. Also, this is the opportunity for innovation, right? This is where you can start really thinking about, how does this really happen? How does this work together? And this one, this is a biggie. Yes and no, right? When I don't know if many of you know this, but when the Open Badges backpack was first created, it was intended to be a reference implementation of software that could understand Open Badges. There was never really intended to be a backpack. I don't really know how we got there. Backpacks actually could be more like wallets, where you have control over your information, you can carry it around with you. Wallets don't even have to be just like wallets, they could be applications. They could do all sorts of things in there. I know somebody who's building out a wallet app that does internship matching, right? So anything that you can store the credentials, share them from, that can be a wallet. I think backpacks could be more like wallets. I mean, you talk about that some more later. All right. I've left 2 minutes for questions, so we'll take one question. Who has the most important question in the room? All right, Simone, you were first. You win.
It's not a question, but because we like to recognize people in this community, I would like to recognize Kerri for her role as a co-chair.
That's not good. Thank you. It's very sweet of you.
So it's all right. A lot of the stuff that you talked about, like the convergence of open badges and verifiable credentials, was stewarded within that community with the help of many of you. And I think that is one of the most important achievements for this community, to enable ORCA and all the crazy things that you're going to do in the future.
Thank you, Simone. Appreciate that. Anybody have a question?
What's the data store in the issuer controller?
So there is no data store. Well, okay, that's not true. For credential status, we're using a GitHub. And that's in there. But we've learned that the GitHub API can be problematic. It can be limited. So we're going to create a database version one. But that's the only way we're using database. Otherwise, whoever is doing this can decide what the data store is. Yeah. All right, everybody, thank you. I normally do presentations on Zoom. It's the first time I've done it in person for a while, so I appreciate you all. Nice to see all of you. Thank you. Oh, can I do one more thing? I'm sorry.
What?
I just put this on the screen real quick.
No, because we're changing.
I know.
Oh, thank you. Yes, you wanted to say thank you.
Hey, everybody. I can do this QR code is for a demo sign up. It's a Google form. I can give it to you later, but if you're interested in getting an Open Badge as a verifiable credential through the wallet, use that QR code and I'll set you up with that later. Thank you.